Confined within the walls of a South African jail, the young lawyer from India found no reason to complain.
Some say that jail is a palace. Others look upon it as a beautiful garden. Some others hold that through the jail gates we shall pass from our present bondage to freedom.
The year was 1907. The young lawyer from India was Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi led his fellow Indians in a non-violent struggle against racial oppression for 8 years. They marched into forbidden territory. They burned their registration papers. They expected to be arrested, and they were not disappointed. Gandhi said, "Non-violent refusal to cooperate with injustice is the way to defeat it." He gave his non-violent weapon a name, Satyagraha, holding to truth. In every decade and on every continent, underdogs have taken up Gandhi's strategies to fight for their rights and freedom.
Nonviolence means fighting back, but you're fighting back with other weapons.
The power that Gandhi discovered changed the 20th century. India, crown jewel of the world's greatest colonial empire. Britain has ruled India for more than a century. But in 1930, the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, knows a crisis is coming. A confrontation in which British military might will count for little. Irwin's adversary is Mohandas Gandhi, a man whose name is already a synonym for non-violent action. Since returning from South Africa, Gandhi has become his country's dominant political figure. He understands that control of India depends on Indian cooperation, not British coercion.
He said, how can just 100,000 British troops control at that time over 350 million Indians? Just 100,000 British troops. Gandhi said, we'll stop doing anything that the British want us to do. The whole nation will come to a standstill. Civil disobedience on a mass scale.
Many Indians welcome the struggle. Gandhi must find a way to use their energy to maximum effect. Gandhi retires to his headquarters on the Sabarmati River, near India's west coast. In the ashram, the spiritual community where he lives, he turns inward in search of a non-violent strategy for freedom. For weeks, he is alone in his Spartan office. He gives no hint of his thinking.
They even commented
Narayan Desai lived in Gandhi's ashram during those critical weeks.
Some said, oh, he's a very clever man. He doesn't want the British government to know what strategy he's going to take. And he would all the time say, no, I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for the call, and I know I will hear the inner voice.
In February, he decides he will begin by challenging the British tax and monopoly on salt. He writes the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, on March the 2nd. He explains the injustice of the salt laws and says he will go to the beach to make salt illegally. He will invite all Indians to do the same. He pleads with Irwin to negotiate. A few days later, a note from Irwin's secretary expresses the Viceroy's regret at Gandhi's plan of action. Gandhi sends advance teams to choose a beach where civil disobedience will begin. In speeches and articles, he attacks the salt laws, emphasizing the injustice, especially to the poor. He knows that salt will be a powerful symbol.
Every human being needs salt. Without salt, you and I can't exist. So he wanted to touch a chord in every Indian heart that here is something you and I and all of us need. Why should that be taxed?
With a sharp instinct for political theatre, Gandhi charts a route from his ashram to the sea. He and his volunteers will walk 240 miles. Being on the road for nearly a month, he believes, will build suspense and a bigger audience for his message. He expects to be arrested before he reaches the coast. At first light on March 12th, the great drama begins. At 60, Gandhi is the oldest of 78 marchers. Thousands join the procession, including police observers. But the government makes no attempt to interfere.
They feared that he was so popular that there may be a violent outbreak. So they weighed the advantages and disadvantages of arresting him. And they also underrated this movement, Salt Satyagraha. They felt it might fizzle out. And Gandhi looked ridiculous that if he goes on marching and he does not commit any breach of the laws, we can't arrest him. What are we arresting him for?
Gandhi wants to be arrested, but not too soon. The longer he marches, the more publicity he will receive. His messages are aimed equally at his immediate audience and the outside world, represented by dozens of journalists who have joined the march. In his speeches, he insists, we must not hate the British. They have not taken India from us. We have given it to them.
Gandhiji, as I knew him as a schoolboy, was someone you admired, someone you looked up to, someone who was a saint. He was a saint because A, he dressed like a saint, and B, the things he said seemed to be very saintly. On the other side, as I grew up, I began to see a very shrewd student of human history. He was a man who absolutely understood human psychology. He understood the British idea of fair play. He understood that, and he knew how to play on that sentiment.
Although the Crown never hesitates to use force, British administrators pride themselves on their enlightened rule and the cooperation they receive from Indian officials. Gandhi intends to remove Indian consent to foreign rule. The Salt March will create a dilemma. If they arrest him, all India will rise up in protest. If he is permitted to openly defy the law, British control will be lost, perhaps irretrievably. In every speech, Gandhi explains the power of non-violent resistance. He asks local leaders to quit their government jobs. When everyone refuses to cooperate, he says, the British will be able to do nothing.
he was asking the village headmen to resign their posts. And I think 140 or so did resign. Why did he ask them to resign? It is a government, foreign government, running this country for their own benefit. And why should you serve it?
Defying rumors that his health is failing, Gandhi sticks to his schedule. At every rest stop, he asks, how many local officials have quit their government jobs? How many villages are wearing khadi, the handmade cotton cloth that is the informal uniform of his movement? Gandhi tells Indians not to buy imported cloth. He spins cotton for 2 hours every day to dramatize the millions of jobs lost to imported British cloth. Gandhi says, if every Indian will spin at the same time, the song of the spinning wheel will become the song of freedom. He gets by on 4 hours sleep. He must persuade thousands of volunteers to be arrested and go to jail, or his long march will end in failure.
And here was a man who understood how to get the maximum exposure for his message. And in a sense, you can say he was one of India's greatest, I hate to use the word, but within quotes, advertising men. And as he marched, long before Martin Luther King's March on Washington, Gandhiji was the originator of this. And as he marched, people began to spread the word. He's on the march. He's going to defy the law. Let's join him. This is a chance to show the British, without having to hit them, to show them that we stand for something. We are not just slaves. And by God, even I, who was only a schoolboy at that time, I tell you, my hair stood on end when I realized he was slowly approaching the goal. And we all knew once he picked up that handful of salt, he would be arrested.
On the 24th day, the marchers approached the sea. An American newspaper editorializes, as Britain lost America through tea, it is about to lose India through salt. On the eve of the law-breaking, Gandhi meets on the beach with 12,000 supporters. Hold the salt in your fist, he suggests, and think it is worth 60 million rupees. That's how much the government has been taking from us through the monopoly on salt. At dawn on April 6th, Gandhi bends down and picks up a lump of mud and salt. News that Gandhi has broken the salt law electrifies the country. Thousands march to the shore to follow his example. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's future Prime Minister, describes the mood.
It seemed as though a spring had been suddenly released. All over the country, salt manufacture was the topic of the day. It was immaterial whether the stuff was good or bad. The main thing was to commit a breach of the obnoxious salt law, and we were successful in that.
This tremendous success of Salt Satyagraha was not foreseen by the British. There were many skeptics who thought, Salt Satyagraha what? You can't unseat the king emperor by boiling sea water in a kettle. So that was the assumption. But in a non-violent struggle, it is the insight of the leader which matters, you know. What will mobilize the people? What will make them feel that they have a cause to fight for, and what will make them fight it non-violently?
As his movement engulfs the country, Gandhi is surprised he's not been arrested. Visiting seaside villages, he encourages civil disobedience, which he says is only the beginning. Today we are defying the salt law. Tomorrow we shall have to consign other laws to the waste paper basket. We shall practice such non-cooperation that finally it will not be possible for the administration to carry on.
When you are non-violent, how do we tackle you? How do we meet your challenge? At the most, we can imprison you. And if we imprison you, again you become more popular. We can't use arms against you. We can't use violence against you. So here is a person who has evolved a technique which overpowers the British.
From the government in New Delhi, Lord Irwin cables London.
The personal influence of Gandhi threatens to embarrass the administration, and in some areas he has already undermined government authority.
Gandhi's headquarters are on the beach. A month after he picked up the first lump of salt, he announces an escalation. He and his volunteers will seize the government salt works at the nearby town of Darasana. Near midnight on May 4th, he writes to Lord Irwin, offering 3 ways to stop the raid on the salt works. End the salt tax, arrest the raiding party, or break their heads. He finishes the letter and retires for the night. By the next morning, Gandhi is behind bars. He is delighted. The arrest sets off a firestorm. In city after city, normal life comes to a standstill. Lord Irwin announces a strategy of steady pressure. Police are to use minimum force. Irwin issues emergency ordinances. Political meetings are prohibited. The press is censored. The Indian National Congress Working Committee is banned. Irwin's plan to avoid repression fails as the new ordinances provide new opportunities for law-breaking. Thousands are arrested, exactly what Gandhi wants.
A batch of policemen came to arrest my father, and some of us young children were following the police van, and instead of saying bye-bye, Papa, or something like that, I was telling him, Papa, this time no less than 2 years, which means I want you to be in prison for no less than 2 years. You see, it was a pride to have your father sentenced for 2 years and not for 3 months or so. So Gandhi's idea is what had touched even the children in that atmosphere.
Gandhi's raid on the Darasana salt works goes forward without him. A well-known poet, Sarojini Naidu, leads the siege. She instructs her army.
You must not use violence under any circumstances. You will be beaten, but you must not resist. You must not even raise a hand to ward off the blows.
After 10 days of skirmishing, 2,500 demonstrators confront the guards head-on. Police attack the satyagrahis with steel-tipped clubs called lathis. A United Press reporter, Webb Miller, witnessed the scene.
They went down like 10 pins. I heard the sickening whacks of the clubs on unprotected skulls. Those struck down fell, sprawling, unconscious, or writhing with pain, with fractured skulls or broken shoulders.
Miller's report is published in nearly 2,000 newspapers and read aloud in the US Senate. One Satyagrahi explained,
"Our object was to show the world at large the fangs and claws of the government in all its ugliness and ferocity. In this, we have succeeded beyond measure."
In midsummer, the struggle is undiminished. Even with Gandhi and most nationalist leaders in prison, government has effectively lost control of major cities. Press reports of police brutality damage the British cause almost as much as the resistance campaign. Irwin cables the governor of Bombay.
I am sure these lathi charges are exactly what our enemies want. We should be racking our brains for a way to deny them this advantage.
In July, government reports nearly 17,000 civil resistors have been arrested. Gandhi's goal of filling the jails is more than self-sacrifice. It is mass disobedience and is steadily eroding British authority.
If an authority enjoys power, he enjoys power to the extent to which obedience is rendered. But the moment the obedience goes off, moment the laws are disobeyed, moment the command of the powerful are not obeyed, your power vanishes.
Those who can't endure the hardships of jail can still help in the fight, boycotting or picketing shops which sell British goods. When sales suffer, Lord Irwin issues a Prevention of Intimidation Ordinance against picketing. The result? More arrests, as bystanders cheer. British trade with India drops 25%. And in December, 3 out of 4 foreign cloth shops are closed. By January, the British Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald sees that negotiations are the only way to end the standoff. He orders Gandhi and the other leaders released. The national movement remains strong as Gandhi's release is celebrated. But the commander knows his foot soldiers need a rest. On February the 14th, he informs Lord Irwin that he is ready to negotiate. He insists that salt-making and boycotts will continue during the talks. At the Viceroy's Palace in New Delhi, Gandhi is the first Indian ever to meet with a British ruler as an equal. Negotiations last 3 weeks. Irwin refuses to give ground on the salt laws and cloth imports, concessions which would alienate his Indian collaborators. Gandhi secures the release of political prisoners and the lifting of repressive ordinances. He calls off civil disobedience. Constitutional issues are pushed back for later talks in London.
There were many people who were not satisfied. They thought that perhaps Gandhi compromised and perhaps went out of his way. But Gandhi's argument always was that this movement is not in vain, because it is through such movements that he is training people, that you can't have everything at one stroke. You compromise, you gather your strength, you train yourself, and then take the next step.
A year after the Salt March, India remains under British rule. But Gandhi has ended the pretense of British legitimacy in India. By exposing injustice and ending Indians' consent to foreign rule, he has awakened the people to their own power and set India on the road to independence. Britain grants Indian independence 16 years later, in 1947. Within a year, Gandhi is dead of an assassin's bullet. Far beyond his accomplishments in India, his vision and his practice of non-violent conflict have set an example for future generations. He had once said, "My technique of non-violent struggle is in the same stage as electricity in Edison's time, to be refined and developed."